Good evening, everyone. This is Attorney Marlon Hill, a proud 1995 graduate of the Florida State University College of Law and also a member of the Black Alumni Network. Welcome to BAN TV, the Black Alumni Network. We are live right now on our Facebook and YouTube page, and we are so happy that you are here with us for another BAN TV conversation celebrating February of Black History Month. We have a great conversation for you, everyone to join us in at this time. We're going to be learning more about the Virgil Hawkins B.K. Roberts story. Before giving you any details about that, we have a very special excerpt of a PBS documentary that really encapsulates the Virgil Hawkins story. You know, that lawyer from the state of Florida that was made in heaven. You know, sit back and listen to this vintage documentary excerpt. It will put into context our conversation for our very special guest right here on our Black Alumni Network, BAN TV. Stay tuned.
In April 1949, with the support and encouragement of the NAACP, Virgil Hawkins applied for admission to the University of Florida Law School. He was found to be qualified in every way, but his admission was denied solely because of his race. In defiance of the clear precedent based on Sweat v. Painter, previously decided by the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of Florida approved the opening of a separate law school at an established black state college, Florida A&M, for the sole purpose of excluding Virgil Hawkins' admission to the University of Florida.
But I can faintly remember them talking about the seriousness of it, and the cross that was burnt. It was one burnt in front of my grandmother's house.
Over the next few years, Hawkins' petition to be admitted to the University of Florida Law School was repeatedly rejected by the Florida Supreme Court. In the landmark case of Brown versus the Board of Education, the United States Supreme Court held that segregation in public school facilities based upon race, even if the facilities are equal, is unconstitutional. Now that the United States Supreme Court made it clear that race could not be the sole basis for discrimination in its admissions policy to a state university, the Florida Supreme Court, in an effort to exclude Virgil Hawkins, determined that admitting him to the all-white University of Florida could cause grave and serious problems affecting the welfare of the students. The Murphy Commission was set up by the court to investigate that concern.
It certainly just looked like to me that this was a delaying tactics to forestall and to postpone the admission of Virgil Hawkins to a all-white institution.
Virgil Hawkins selflessly agreed to withdraw his original application to the University of Florida after his 9-year court battle so that other blacks could be immediately admitted to the University of Florida.
Virgil made it possible for me to go to law school at the University of Florida, and made it possible for me to open the door for the rest of the blacks that came after me. And so I see him as kind of the father of the black legal profession in the state of Florida. He made it all possible.
After pending for 2 years, the Florida Supreme Court granted Jim Shook's petition for waiver of the bar examination requirement for Virgil Hawkins. On February 8, 1977, Virgil Hawkins was sworn in as a member in good standing of the Florida Bar. At the time of his admission as a lawyer, Hawkins said, "This is the proudest day of my life. I want to start a legal services program for people barely making a living, who don't qualify for legal aid but still can't afford to hire a lawyer." Then State Senator Carrie Meek introduced a bill in the Florida legislature to name the law library at Florida State University after Virgil Hawkins.
I thought it was an excellent idea, and it would be a fitting memorial for Virgil. So I filed a bill to name that building after Virgil Hawkins. I cannot tell you the furor that caused in the Florida legislature.
Immediately after Senator Meek's bill to honor Mr. Hawkins was introduced in the legislature, a pending grievance against him was made public, violating the rules of confidentiality. The grievance alleged that Mr. Hawkins had acted incompetently as a lawyer for what amounted to a minor error in a criminal proceeding. In November 1983, Hawkins appeared in his own defense before the Florida Supreme Court to contest the Florida Bar's recommendation that he be temporarily suspended as a lawyer.
The 28th of this month, I'll be 77 years old. And all of you know, all of us know, that at the age 77, the sand in the hourglass of time is swiftly running out. I would hate very much to be suspended on a little thing and I leave here not a member of the bar. When I get to heaven, I want to be a member of the Florida Bar.
The attempts to remove Hawkins from the legal profession did not end with the unsuccessful effort in '83.
On April 19, 1985, at the age of 78, with some grievances pending against him, Virgil Hawkins voluntarily surrendered his license to practice law. Virgil Hawkins died February 22nd, 1988. Within 2 months after Hawkins' death, Harley Herman petitioned the Florida Supreme Court to posthumously reinstate Virgil Hawkins as a lawyer in good standing. On October 20, 1988, almost 40 years after Virgil Hawkins applied to law school, the Florida Supreme Court posthumously reinstated him as a member of the Florida Bar. The court acknowledged the injustices visited upon him in the past, as well as the difficulties he had to face as an attorney. Virgil Hawkins never sought personal glory. Like other truly great people, he rose from the trenches in battles he never planned to fight, and sacrificed himself so that others could enjoy the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, welcome back again to the Black Alumni Network TV or Black History Conversation, right here live on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Thank you for joining us here this evening. February 9th, this is also a year of the anniversary of the passing of Virgil Darnell Hawkins passing here in the state of Florida. What would that feel like? Your dreams being stopped in the tracks of any career, whether it be a legal career or not. So we're going to be joined by a illustrious panel that knows this story very well. We have the niece of Virgil Hawkins, Miss Harriet Livingston, joining us here live on Band TV. We have Mr. Herman, who you saw in the PBS documentary that filed the petition to have him reinstated to the bar. And we have Mr. Danny Vogt, who's also here. Both of them know the story very well. So before we begin, lady and gentlemen, let's talk a little bit about who Virgil Hawkins was first, just as a person. And maybe Harriet, you can begin to tell me, what was he like as an uncle? Tell us a little bit about the person Virgil Hawkins before began this legal journey.
Yes, I'd love to do that. He was a happy person. No matter what was going on, he would always make you laugh. He would always say something when you greeted him that would make you laugh too. He came from a very religious family. His father was a preacher. His grandfather was a preacher, and he was just a happy man, and enjoyed his family and siblings.
So tell us a little bit about what you recall. You watching that PBS documentary, Miss Harriet. What was your emotion? What was your feeling at that, just having watched that?
It brings back a lot of um, emotions that I went through, that the whole entire family went through during that time. Because during that time, um, we were really, as a family, afraid. Sometimes we were afraid we would not tell people our last name and all. And watching that, it just brought back those feelings and memories of going through that particular time.
Mhm.
And it made me think about the things that his wife, Aunt Ida, went through during those times. So it mixed emotions,
Mm,
mixed emotions.
mm. Well, I'm definitely going to come back to you to talk about the contemporary feeling of Black history and Virgil Hawkins in a minute. But Mr. Herman, as the president of the Virgil Hawkins Historical Society, tell us, how did you come to know Virgil Hawkins?
Privilege of being able to practice law in the town he was practicing in, starting my practice around the same time as him.
What town was that?
Excuse me?
What town was that, Mr. Herman?
That's in Leesburg.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is he was in his 70s and I was in my late 20s. I had gone to the University of Florida that he was denied admission to. But despite all that, I mean, the best way I can describe having Mr. Hawkins on the other side of a case is kind of like walking into the ring with an aging Muhammad Ali.
Oh, boy.
That you knew you weren't getting his best, but when he landed a punch, it threw you on the floor of the canvas very quickly. And, I got the sense of what we as a state had lost by denying him that opportunity. And, it ought to be noted that, while the documentary talks about his 9-year battle, he had an option if he was looking out for himself. And this is, one of the reasons that in addition to being a great civil rights hero, he's an inspiration to humanity, because if you go to the FAMU archives, there's a telegram in there where he is notified that he's been accepted to the FAMU College of Law, a school that was created actually for him. They didn't care if anyone else came. And in reality, because of him, 57 attorneys ended up graduating from that school, including some of the most illustrious attorneys that we had in those early years. But all he had to do was drop out. They said, here it is. I mean, he can go down in history, not just for desegregating our public universities, but he's probably the only law school applicant that was admitted to a law school he never applied to.
Mm-hmm.
And the telegram said, here's the day you're supposed to show up. Here's the room you're supposed to show up. Here's where you can get on-campus housing and come on in and start going to law school.
Mm.
And of course, if he did that, it would have ended the lawsuit. It would have delayed integration for probably a half a decade, and we might have had our governor standing in the doorway the way Governor Wallace was. And so, you know, part of what makes him so special is he chose to give that up to help others. And you know, all of us have that time when we decided to become a lawyer. His decision came when he was 6 years old, which also gives you an idea of how great his mind was. That as a 6-year-old, he walked into a courtroom, he saw Black defendants that basically were being sentenced for crimes around the time it was ready to harvest crops, so they could end up being slave labor. And in his mind, a 6-year-old who had never met a lawyer said, I need to become a lawyer. I need to help these people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when he applied, he was already public relations director of Bethune-Cookman College. He could have stayed with that, but that burning desire from age 6 never went away. And so, you know, the respect that I had, that at the end of his life, you know, at the time, the Florida Supreme Court had a mandatory retirement age of 70, which means they felt that the justices on that court, with decades of experience, could no longer continue to function. And it was the same time they were bringing him in right at the beginning. And you know, I met a man who was just determined to help as many people as he could, regardless of the consequences to him.
Right.
And I didn't know all of the story, but every time I encountered him, I would say to my wife, I've just been in the presence of greatness, because you could feel it. It radiated out of his body, the notions of equity and justice and right and wrong. I mean, it just, again, I feel privileged. And when I went to his funeral, and my wife and I and the mayor of Leesburg were the only white individuals there in an overflow crowd. There was nobody from the state of Florida, nobody from the University of Florida. I came to the conclusion, if something wasn't done, he was going to be written out of history. And I didn't believe I could do it, but something said, you got to try. And
well,
so
we greatly appreciate you.
that's how it all pulls together.
We greatly appreciate you stepping into the journey of history there. Mr. Vogt, I definitely want to bring you into this conversation. If you could take us back a little bit, you know, you are Florida State University College of Law grad 1984 and 1985. Florida State University College of Law opened its doors in 1966. But there's a lot of history that happened before the law school opened. Could you kind of put into context what led up to the opening of Florida State University's College of Law, and Justice Roberts, the role that he played in the story of Virgil Hawkins? Justice Roberts, the role that he played in the story of Virgil Hawkins. Justice Roberts, the role that he played in the story of Virgil Hawkins.
Okay. I first came across Virgil when I was in second year of law school. And I was researching some books in the FSU Law Library, and I noticed some of the books were stamped Florida A&M College of Law, and I had never heard of the Florida A&M College of Law. So I looked into it a little bit, and I found out that the whole story, just kind of a journey of self-discovery, where I was able to read all the cases all the way back to the beginning and figure out who Virgil Hawkins was and who B.K. Roberts was and their individual roles in the entire saga. And upon learning the whole story. This wasn't explained to us in law school in any official way. You had to just kind of find out on your own. And being a former reporter, I had the skills available to look up Virgil Hawkins in the phone book somehow in Leesburg. I called him up and talked to him and invited him up to the FSU Law School to speak. And he spoke in 1983 to a packed house in the law school lounge. And unfortunately, I was a broke law student at the time, did not have a video camera, did not have a tape recorder, did not even have a still camera. But he made a very big impression on me and the rest of the people in the law school. I got to chauffeur him around Tallahassee for one day in his Cadillac. I also got him to appear on the radio, and he spoke in B.K. Roberts Hall, which was kind of ironic at the time. B.K. Roberts got his name on the law school in 1973 because B.K. Roberts was instrumental in founding the school in the 1960s. And it went from a germ of an idea. University of Florida had a law school. FSU did not. Someone had the idea, well, why doesn't FSU get a law school? B.K. Roberts was a mover and shaker in Tallahassee, having been a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was well connected. He put together funding. He found faculty. He hired a dean. He was the head of two separate committees who were in charge of starting the law school. And he, in the space of a year, found a building, found a bunch of students, hired enough staff, and from 1965 until the school opened in 1966, B.K. Roberts essentially put together all the things necessary for FSU Law School to open and start teaching classes and hosting students and everything. So he's considered the founder of the FSU Law School. That is on his headstone in Tallahassee, that he's the founder of the school. I think he deserves the recognition for doing that. I was not associated with the law school in the 1970s when all this was going on, but the students I've talked to who were in the law school at the time protested his name going on the building. There seemed to be no mention of B.K. Roberts' opinions in the 1950s, keeping Virgil Hawkins out of the University of Florida because he was Black. And as time went on, how can you say this? The times changed. And what was acceptable back in the 1950s and in the 1960s, in the 1970s, today is kind of indefensible. And so that's why I have been working for several years, since 2018 when I retired, to try to get B.K. Roberts' name off of the law school.
Right. And so Mr. Vogt, what's the mission, the ultimate mission of reconciling these stories, which are layering over each other with regards to the renaming of the law school in the context of Virgil Hawkins?
Well, it's hard to say. It's widely considered to be impossible to get his name off of the building, but it doesn't stop me from trying. I've been going down to the Capitol a couple days a week trying to get a bill filed that would remove his name, or that would at least sunset his name. This is the 50-year anniversary of the legislature putting his name on the building. And I think 50 years of recognition may be long enough, but the legislature is not really amenable to social justice issues like this. And so it's a difficult climb. We have various ideas that might make it more successful, and maybe one of those will work. Over the years, it did pass the Senate a couple of years ago and was never taken up by the House. But since the last 3 or 4 years, the bill to rename the building has never made it out of committee.
Gotcha. So, Mr. Herman, if you could, did Virgil ever meet any of these justices, including Justice Roberts, during his career or during while those chapters of his story?
Probably not. To put a little of this in a little more perspective, I appreciate Danny's kind version of B.K. Roberts. First of all, in terms of creating the FSU school, it wasn't just like, my God, we don't have a law school in Tallahassee. We did. We had one at FAMU. And the money that he got was the money taken away from FAMU. Some of the initial books were the books taken away from FAMU. The idea was we created a sliver of a school without the kind of funding and professors that Roberts recruited for FSU. But we did this so that we could have a defense to the effort to integrate both FSU and University of Florida. Right. And now that the court ordered it, we certainly are not going to spend all that money on FAMU. And that actually became the selling point, because University of Florida was bitterly opposed. As you know, the rivalry exists. And anything that UF had, they didn't want going to FSU. FSU originally was the college for women. And then when everybody started coming back from World War II, they had to make both co-ed because they needed more room for more male students. And most likely, if the FAMU school hadn't existed and the funding wasn't being spent, it could have taken at least a half a decade or more beyond when FSU's law school was opened. But, Roberts basically said to the legislature, you bunch of fools, you know how much money you're giving to FAMU, and we could bring it over here? Because Constance Baker Motley, who was the last attorney on the Hawkins case when it went to federal court, told me, she had contacted me when she was writing her memoirs, wanted some of the records and information I had acquired. And she said that the federal judge, Dozier Devane, turned to her and said, you know what's going to happen when I enter this order is all the white lawyers are going to send their sons to FAMU, and then none of your people are going to get in. And we spent all this money on your people. Don't you realize what you're doing? Well, the reality was that as much as there were lawyers who wanted their sons, and I say sons because they didn't believe back then that women had any place in the practice of law, but, they were not going to have their sons with a diploma from FAMU on the wall of their law offices. So they didn't send their sons there. And Roberts was able to pull this off by saying, we're wasting all this money educating a bunch of black lawyers. The second thing about him that is, really the reason why his name doesn't belong there is he was the author of the opinions after the U.S. Supreme Court said you must admit Hawkins, who wrote the opinions that said we're not going to listen to the United States Supreme Court. You can get, the states' rights stuff. You read Roberts' opinions and it's in there. He's only outdone by Justice Terrell, who cited to God's plan for putting separate races on separate continents, that now somehow 9 men in Washington, D.C. were defying the will of God. But short of that, Roberts' opinions were every much, it could have come directly out of a George Wallace speech. And it wasn't just the Times, because both Justice Sebring, who went on to become the first dean of the Stetson Law School when it moved to Gulfport, and by the way, because he was a segregationist. There never was a single black student in Stetson while he was dean. But nevertheless, he wrote in a dissenting in part opinion that we have an obligation to obey the rulings of a higher Supreme Court. And so did two other justices. So they knew what they were doing was illegal. And I'm one of the few people that have the initial draft of the opinion when Mr. Hawkins petitioned to become a member of the Florida bar. And the initial draft was going to say, hey, we can't do it because he's too old, it's too late, it's not going to work. They knew this was a prescription for failure. But when they tried to do that opinion, Justice Hatchett did a stinging dissent. And unlike Danny's description, Hatchett used words to describe Roberts such as illegal. And basically, if Hatchett's dissent had ever been published, it was a standing indictment for why Roberts not only should have been removed from the court, and of course he retired shortly after Hawkins was admitted, so there wasn't really time for that, but also to be disbarred from the Florida bar, which did not happen because he had openly defied the direct orders, and there were two direct orders of the U.S. Supreme Court, and his fellow justices in the 1950s said, this is wrong. We don't agree with it, but we understand what it means. And they basically said, if our orders are going to be respected, we have to respect the orders of a higher court. So they knew what they were doing was wrong. And as I say, Justice Hatchett's opinion was what they were doing was illegal.
Right.
So how do you have the name of somebody who illegally defied the highest ethics that supposedly are used to remove people like myself if I do the same thing? And that's your inspiration for law students?
Miss Harriet, you hear these stories. You were a young person at the time, likely, during those years. But for Uncle Virgil, to you, just tell us a little bit about having now known knowing the legal history now, and then if you could just give me your first visceral emotion about understanding the full picture of that now, and then what message do you have for the young people that are attending the law school now or thinking about going to law school with your Uncle Virgil's story?
Okay, I couldn't really hear the first part of what you asked.
My first part of my question is, hearing this history and the legal wranglings over your Uncle Virgil, and being older now and having a fuller understanding of it. What are your thoughts on that and your emotions on that? And then secondly, what's your message to the young people that are in law school now or thinking about law school? Having that fuller understanding of your Uncle Virgil's story.
Okay. Just thinking back, and you were correct that I was a young person at that time, but now as an adult, just looking back at that and what he went through, it just amazes me how he was able to withstand and all that he went through. And as I said in the beginning, with a smile, with a jolly laugh on his face. It's just amazing that he had the strength, but that was his God-given powers. So it's just amazing during that time to just imagine, how he felt going through that, but at the same time, putting this other face on the outside. And I would say to young people today, follow your dream. Follow your dream, no matter what You might have to go through some trials and some tribulations, but follow your dream. Even though he didn't get into the University of Florida, I feel he still accomplished part of his dream because it was open to people of his color. And that you would have to take a big man to step aside so your fellow man can walk through the door that you struggle and struggle to go through. So it's just amazing. I'm just so proud to be the niece of Virgil Hawkins. And I always say when I talk to people, I just have to give Harley accolades for doing this because Harley is not a man of color. And he
Really?
felt the need to do this. And it just astounds me. And I just love Harley for the love and dedication that he has. So, young people, follow your dream. No matter what, follow your dreams.
Thank you for that message, Miss Harriet. Danny, and over to you. You were in that law school classroom when Virgil visited Florida State University. Tell us about that room and what was the emotion then? Take us back to that room when he visited in the early 1980s. The emotion then. Take us back to that room when he visited in the
Well,
early 1980s. Take us back to that
I don't know how to describe it.
Well,
the room was packed, standing room only. Virgil had definitely built up over the years a certain need to express himself and how he felt about the whole situation.
Danny, hold one quick second. I don't know. Do you have another device that you are listening to? You may be getting some feedback.
I have this on two different screens. I'm not sure.
You should put the one that you are
If I
not
need to
using
have
on
it
mute.
open.
Put that on mute.
So there, can you hear me now?
Much better. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes, when he came to the law school and spoke, B.K. Roberts was invited to be there along with him so they could face each other after all these years, but B.K. Roberts declined and was busy doing something else. But you could tell over the years, Virgil Hawkins, his feelings, animosity, his pride, his need to express his side of the story had been festering inside of him for years. He had some sort of preacher in his personality, and he came and gave the fieriest speech that I have ever seen in my life. There were people in the audience who knew the story, many who didn't know a thing about it, and it was just jaw-droppingly wonderful to give him the stage to express himself and to tell the story and tell how it was from his point of view. I don't know how to say this. I'm not a historian, but in Florida, I believe I can think of only one other person who was treated worse by the Florida government than Virgil, and that was Chief Osceola, the chief of the Seminole tribe during the Seminole Wars. The wars ended when he was offered a chance to come and sign a peace treaty, and he came innocently to the United States government army, ready to sign a peace treaty to end the war, and instead he was tricked and thrown in jail as a tactic for the U.S. to get victory in the Seminole Indian Wars. And I believe Virgil is on a level of that as the most the citizen of Florida who was treated the worst by the Florida government of any other person I know. And after Virgil's speech, we got a bill filed in the legislature. They were building the law school library at the time, which was a separate building from B.K. Roberts Hall. We got Kerry Meek to file a bill in the legislature in 1983, I believe, that would have named the law school after Virgil Hawkins to kind of balance out the B.K. Roberts and Virgil Hawkins. And of course, that did not pass, but it did lead to the creation of the Virgil Hawkins scholarships, which many Black students attending FSU Law School used over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So same question for you, Mr. Vogt, that I asked Ms. Harriet. What's your message to the law students of Florida State, or any of the law students that are in law school now in the state of Florida, now being retired? What's your message to them, inspired by the Virgil Hawkins story?
And I'm sorry, since I closed that other screen, I'm not able to hear your questions.
So can you hear me? My question is, all right, so I'll come back to you one second.
I'm not able to hear your questions.
No problem.
So can you hear me?
Yes, now I can. I reopened this second screen.
I'll come back to you one second.
So what's your message to the law students of the state of Florida, inspired by Virgil Hawkins?
Yes, now I can. I reopened this second screen.
So what's your message to the law students of the state of Florida, inspired by Virgil Hawkins?
Yes, now I can. I reopened this second screen. Say it again.
What's your message to the law students of the state of Florida?
Say it again.
So I'll come back to you, Danny. So Harley, let me ask you, what's your message to the law students of the state of Florida in the context of hearing this story, understanding this story, the past and the present? What's your message to the law student, Black or white, or any particular background?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can speak to it, beyond simply African American students, but particularly when we're dealing with African American students, I firmly believe, from my knowledge of Mr. Hawkins, the way he was when I saw him a few months before the stroke that took his life, that part of the reason that he could look beyond himself is that he saw the door he opened. And he, like I've told a number of students who said, I received the Hawkins scholarships, including Ben Crump. I said, he never got to know you, but he saw you. And he knew that you would carry on his message and you would take what he wanted to do far beyond anything he could do. And that was enough to sustain him. So that's basically it. I mean, I felt when he died that I had been in the presence of greatness and I had an obligation not to turn my back. My late wife kind of looked in amazement. If you watch the long version of the documentary, she goes, well, I said it was okay. No, that didn't happen. She never said, you're doing what? You're going to destroy our law practice, which I did. But I saw the look in her eyes and it was like, oh no, but she knew I was determined and she wasn't going to stop it. But,
why were you so determined?
Because again, I knew that this was a man of greatness who should not have his legacy be completely destroyed. And at the time that he died, again, the fact that nobody from the state was there. I made a statement when the Supreme Court, Florida Supreme Court in 1999 had a ceremonial session that Virgil Hawkins' body should have lay in state in the state capitol when he died. And I still believe that. Unfortunately, somebody thought it was such a great idea that when B.K. Roberts died, they let his body lie in state in the capitol. But, this was a great man, and it seemed to me that you don't destroy that legacy, the potential inspiration that he had for anyone who finds the need to believe in a cause, to go beyond themselves, was just too great to get it thrown into the trash heap, which essentially was where it was at the time that he died.
Right.
I mean, that day at the funeral, I met some of the most prominent Black attorneys in the state of Florida, but nobody else was there from the state or from the bar or the university. And I just knew, again, I didn't think what I would succeed. I just thought, well, if I do it and it fails, somebody will find it several decades later, and maybe they will be more capable than me of accomplishing it. But I knew if I did nothing, it was going to end that day.
Yeah, and that's the point, and that's the lesson, right?
Yeah.
Doing nothing.
And what I told my wife is, this is more important than anything else I can do. I know we need to earn a living, and I know we worked hard to have a successful office.
Well, I really want to thank your wife for giving you the gracious space to do what you did. She's
yeah. I mean, she passed away a little over a decade ago, but I always did thank her for that.
Yeah.
Because she had to endure,
Yeah.
just as the Hawkins family did. I mean, I don't know the extent to which Harriet wants to talk about it, but in Gilbert King's book, Beneath the Ruthless Sun, in Bob Saunders' book, who was the man who took over the NAACP after Harry T. Moore, they both write about an incident that happened with one of the family members, where they were pulled out of a church and arrested by Sheriff Willis McCall, and Bob Saunders had to get Leroy Collins to intercede, or the person would have been dead. So like I said, I don't know if she wants to share that, but it gives you an idea of everything everybody went through. And what I told my wife is, in comparison to that, what I'm doing is nothing.
Yeah. Well, your wife, I want to thank her again, your late wife. She's definitely a part of this story. As we wind down, Mr. Herman, and I ask everyone for some closing comments and thoughts. Tell us a little bit about the society. What's the latest? How can people connect with what you're doing with the Historical Society, support what you're doing, or follow the story? If you can, share that, please.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What we've tried to do, Harriet's a member of our board, and as well as others from the Leesburg community, we're trying to make sure that the legacy continues on, it isn't lost. Our website, virgilhawkins.org, contains a lot of the history, as well as links to both this short version that you saw and the much longer version that was done by a law professor out of University of Detroit. It's worth watching that alone. There are people on there now who are deceased that were giving kind of their last testament. One of his attorneys, Horace Hill, Leander Shaw, spoke on it. I don't know whether people in the audience today know who Charles Cherry was, but he was the editor of the Daytona Black newspaper. Just a number of people, of course, W. George Allen, the first Black graduate of the University of Florida. There's a lot that they say in there that's worth watching, but the whole story is worth repeating. And certainly one of the things that we wanted to do with the website is provide contact information, so that if somebody decides they want to do a program on this, Mr. Hawkins, we can provide them with resources, sometimes even some of us to participate, but at least give you the basic resources. We have some Hawkins t-shirts, which are one way of making a donation. Okay. There also is a link to make donations, which are appreciated. But it was mostly the fact that we wanted a resource that if somebody wants to retell the story, they can do that. Because like I say, to me, it's inspirational. It certainly is a part of Black history that everybody can be proud of. But it's also a testament to a man in American history that really showed us what the value is of doing something of substance and that there are things greater than yourself. I mean, I never would have, I was not involved in causes when he died, and I never would have been involved. I'm kind of working because I promised the family years ago that I write his story. I'm trying to work on getting that finished. Now it's been 35 years since he died. But I basically say, if I hadn't met him, I'd probably be sitting on a beach somewhere.
I may be seeing you on a stage play soon.
Yeah, and that too.
The lawyer made in heaven.
Yeah.
Mr. Vogt,
yeah, he is an inspiration to people. You know, the best thing I can tell you, and like I say, Harry can say a whole lot more. He was not a broken man at the end of his life. I don't doubt that there were moments of absolute despair, nights that he and his wife cried all night long over what had happened. But he had that ability. When I saw him a few months before his stroke, he looked beyond himself. He saw the graduates of both FSU and University of Florida. He saw Ben Crump never even knowing what the name was going to be.
Yeah.
And, if he was alive today, it would be enough for him to know that lawyers like Ben were a product of what he went through.
Yeah, that's a real special full circle moment. You know, Ben was my law school classmate.
I would just note briefly that, we've encountered a lot of tragedies like George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and now most recently with Tyree. Virgil Hawkins didn't have to watch the videos. He saw those things happen to people that he knew over and over again. And while this lawsuit was going on, the police in Daytona at night would patrol the Black neighborhood calling out his name. He knew at any point, if he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, what we've seen in videos was what was going to happen to him. And despite that, he was not going to be turned around. And again, to me, it was a privilege. And I still consider it a privilege and a blessing that my life ended up intersecting with him, and I could get some inspiration from the man that I got to know.
Mr. Herman, really greatly appreciate your contribution to writing this chapter of history. It's not just Black history, it's your history as well. We certainly appreciate you. Mr. Vogt, closing comments from you. If your technology is agreeing with you somewhat, would love for you to kind of give any parting thoughts for the law school students or even the young lawyers across the state of Florida. What do you have to say to them? State of Florida, what do you have to say to them?
Well, I just say, please realize the fight is not over. I'm shocked when I try to tell people about the story. It's such a niche issue and people just do not know about it. I went to the Black Student Union at Florida State a few weeks ago to try and get them behind the effort to lobby the legislature. And very surprising to me, no one there had ever heard about B.K. Roberts Hall or the Virgil Hawkins, who he was. You have to explain this. And so if there was a way to publicize it more, if it was a way to get more people to know about it, that certainly might make it easier to lobby the legislature to get some changes done. FSU's done everything they could do, as even including taking the letters identifying B.K. Roberts Hall off of the actual law school building, but the name is still on the building until the legislature takes it off. Since the legislature put it on there, only the legislature can remove it. And so I'm trying to put together a coalition to get the legislature to end this once and for all. And so please, if people are listening, please realize the fight is not over. This is not a history thing. This is a current affairs thing. And we need to work very hard on this. And I will second what Harley said. Knowing Virgil and having our paths cross was very inspirational for me. For him to endure what he endured and with a straight face and a smile and perseverance that he showed was very inspirational to me. And I'll also say the same thing for Harley. We joked a few weeks ago, Harley would be what I would be if I had ambition.
Wow.
But Harley, for his efforts to have Virgil recognized and reinstated to the bar and stuff like that, I really admire Harley in many respects for the same reason I admired Virgil.
Well, thank you, Danny Vogt. Rename bkrobertshallnow.org. Please visit that site and join the coalition and learn about the history. This is the reason why we're having this conversation here on Band TV. Miss Harriet Hawkins Livingston, you get the last word from the family. What is the message that you want to share from the family for the rest of this Black History Month or beyond, quite frankly, 365 days of the year? What message do you want to share and close us with?
Just simply, the history of Virgil Hawkins must be carved in stone and etched in the crevices of the mind and soul of all people of our nation and this world. And like you all previously said, the fight is not over. It is really just beginning. So let's keep his name on all lips of the people and make sure our young people are included.
Harriet Hawkins, the family, all the way from Leesburg and all the environs around in the state of Florida. Want to give our special regards to the Hawkins family, the extended Hawkins family. Thank you for opening up these doors of opportunities for us, including someone like myself, and even opening up doors and the minds of our non-Black law students as well. Danny Vogt, he says to keep the fight on, and so we shall, because history is always happening every single day, and we need to make sure that we are informed, aware, and also have the courage and create the gracious space, like the late wife of Harley Herman, who had the courage to do what's right and not be silent when he saw that an injustice was being done. I want to thank you for joining us here on the Black Alumni Network of the Florida State University College of Law TV. We hope that you have an extraordinarily informed and inspired Black History Month here, February 23. Continue to be safe, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you on our next episode of Band TV under the leadership of Conti Moore of the Black Alumni Network. Have a great evening.